So, you may have read some controversial passages in the Bible about God sending someone an evil spirit. But why would God ever send an evil spirit? It kind of sounds odd and it doesn't really make sense, right? But the Bible records instances where God sent or allowed evil spirits to act in specific circumstances, but this may not be for the reason you might be assuming. You may be thinking, oh, well, if he sent an evil spirit to someone, he is an evil God and he's not a good God. But there's actually some things to consider before coming to this conclusion. The reasons often are actually for things like judgment, correction, or to accomplish his divine purposes. This may seem perplexing, but it reflects the Bible's teaching that God is sovereign over all creation, including spiritual beings, and uses of all things, both good and evil, for his purpose. So let's go a little deeper and get right into it. So, one reason is to enact judgment or disobedience. God sometimes allows or sends evil spirits as an instrument of judgment against those who have persistently rejected him or acted wickedly. He wouldn't be a just judge if he didn't. It's just like, if somebody was being tried for being a pedo or a murderer or something like that, and if the judge just let them go, we'd look at him like he wasn't a good judge, right? We wouldn't be like, oh, he let him go. What a great, nice guy he is, right? So you kind of have to think about it in the same way with God. Is he just or is he not? Is he going to, just let these people act wickedly? And those who persistently reject him and do all this terrible things to people, is he going to judge them? Or is he going to just, let it go and just show love to criminal people, right? But if you think about it, how it reflects his justice and the consequences of rebellion, you might say, well, persistent is how long? Well, in one case, let's look at for the Amorites and the Canaanites that were in the land of Canaan. It was 400 years until God said that their iniquity was full for judgment to drive them out of the land. So they weren't innocent. When people will say, like, oh, what an evil God this is for just driving these people out of their land for no reason at all. But back whenever he spoke to Abraham and he said, I'm going to make a people of you and they're going to be numerous, which are the Israelites, and it's going to be, he said, in the verse, he said, your people are going to be enslaved for 400 years because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full, right? So he's saying that he's giving these people 400 years to turn from their wicked ways and to turn back to him. That's a long time. We don't even let people get away with stuff for 400 years. So, God's given them ample time, I think. And in another case, God allowed 10 generations to pass from Adam to Noah before deciding to flood the earth. And then it was another 120 years from the time that he told Noah to build the ark to give humanity time to repent before he flooded the earth. I'm not sure if you or me would give someone grace for that long before seeking judgment on them. I'm just saying. I mean, I'm going to be real. I wouldn't, right? I mean, come on. He's God, right? Would he be just if he just let everyone get away with everything? He's the creator of the earth. It belongs to him. He's the creator of everyone. We don't even let people get away with stuff like this before we lock them in jail, right? So I'm sure glad that God is more patient with us than we are with each other. Another example is Saul's disobedience. So this is a direct example of not how long God waited on his judgment, but how he did judge him. After King Saul repeatedly disobeyed God, the Lord withdrew his spirit and allowed an evil spirit to torment Saul as a consequence of his rejection of God's authority. And this comes from the verse in 1 Samuel 16:14. It says, now the spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. So that means God allowed an evil spirit to come and torment Saul mentally. I think so. So this act demonstrated the loss of God's favor and Saul's spiritual decline due to his own choices, right? So Saul decided to depart, to go away from the Lord, to turn his back on him, which in turn, resulted in him opening himself up to what happened next, an evil spirit coming to torment him. So, and another example of this is with Abimelech's treachery. God sent a spirit of division between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem, leading to their mutual destruction as judgment for Abimelech's treachery and violence. And this is in Judges 9:23, where God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem who acted treacherously against Abimelech. That's what the verse says, literally. So yeah, that's exactly what happened. So those are two instances where God sends an evil spirit, right? So another reason is to test or expose people's true motives or their hearts, how they really, really and truly are. So sometimes God will permit evil to operate in order to test the hearts of individuals, exposing their true character and nature and intentions. So, for example, for Ahab's rebellion, King Ahab consistently rejected God. So God allowed a lying spirit to deceive Ahab's prophets, leading him to destruction. So the reference verse for this is 1 Kings 22, 20 through 23. That's a lot of twos. So it says, "And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab into attacking Ramoth Gilead and going to his death there? A spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, I will entice him." So this reveals how God can use even deceptive spirits to bring out his justice while exposing Ahab's unwillingness to repent. I mean, so, he will do that. I mean, and it's not that like this spirit controlled him. Ahab was already evil. He was already opening himself to up to that stuff. If you go back and read, he had his sorcerers and whisperers and false prophets and all that good stuff. So, so he had all that going on already. So don't feel bad for Ahab. He already brought it upon himself. Okay. So another reason is to fulfill divine purposes. So even evil spirits are under God's control. So keep that in mind, right? They can't just go and do whatever they want. They're under God's control and they cannot act outside God's sovereign will. So when God allows them to operate, it is always to fulfill his greater purposes. So for example, Pharaoh's hardening, while not explicitly described as an evil spirit, God hardened Pharaoh's heart to showcase his power and deliver his people. This demonstrates how God can work through rebellion to achieve his redemptive plans. But keep in mind that Pharaoh already hardened his own heart way before God went ahead and sealed the deal and gave him what he already wanted. It was already there. Pharaoh already hardened his own heart. It says multiple times before God comes in, and it says that God hardens Pharaoh's heart. So that's a reference in Exodus 14:4, where it says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and he will pursue them, but I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his armies. So this is not saying like, oh, look at God, he's so bad. He hardened Pharaoh's heart and then he punished him for it. No, Pharaoh's heart was already hard and God was like, all right, you know what? That's what you want. I'm going to give you what you want. Here you go. Go ahead and be how you want to be. But guess what? Through your evil, my glory will shine through. I'm still going to use it in my glory, and I'm still going to show, that I'm powerful and that I'm going to save my people, right? So he still had a purpose. He says, I can take this bad thing and I can turn it into something good, right? And remember, Pharaoh was also not innocent, so don't feel bad for Pharaoh. Pharaoh was an idol worshiper. Pharaoh was a polytheist. He did not worship Yahweh. Even when Moses came to him, he said, who is this God of yours? Who is Yahweh? I don't know him and I don't have to listen to him. So, he was just blaspheming God right up front. But, God didn't strike him down even right immediately like that. He gave him all these plagues. He gave him all these chances to turn to him. Who knows? Maybe it would have been a different story if Pharaoh hadn't done that. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it'd be a whole nother thing today. But I think God already knew that. Because he knows everything. So that's how it went down. And then another reason is as a consequence of free will and sin. So God's actions in sending or permitting evil spirits often follow human rebellion. When people turn away from God, they may open themselves up to spiritual influences as a result of their own choices. So again, I wouldn't say that this is God's fault, like per se. I don't really think you can blame God for this because technically we kind of bring this on ourselves, right? If you go ahead and play with a Ouija board, we have to know that we are opening ourselves up, for an evil spirit to come in. If we do these things, if we, mess with the occult and occult practices and practices of witches and warlocks and all these things, we're opening ourselves up to something evil, right? So, technically, I don't even, this is not even God's fault. This is our own free will. This is us deciding to do these things. So, for example, here's Saul again. Good old Saul, right? Another example is when Saul rejected God. The Spirit of the Lord departed from him, like we said before, allowing his evil spirit to torment him, right? So this illustrates the absence of God's presence can leave somebody vulnerable to spiritual oppression. And that was in 1 Samuel 16:4, where it tormented him. And then he also went to the witch of Endor, and he did that whole thing, right? So that wasn't good either. He was just opening himself to all kind of things, right? Turning to sinful practices, for example, like I said, those who engage in idolatry, divination, rebellion, all these things are described as being handed over to spiritual consequences of their choice. So like in Romans 1:24-28, God gave them over to their sinful desires as judgment. So there's a lot of times that we do bring these things on ourselves because we're kind of giving them the legal right to us, right? So, don't invite these things in. Don't start nothing. It won't be nothing, right? So now I'm not going to say they don't ever come in without being invited because that does happen, because of things other people do to us, unfortunately. But sometimes we invite them in, right? Sometimes we do. So don't do that. That's not good. Another reason is to demonstrate God's sovereignty. By allowing evil spirits to act within his purposes, God demonstrates that he is sovereign over all spiritual forces. And like I said before, evil spirits are not autonomous. They're not equal to God. They are under his control and they cannot act without his permission. Right, in Job, right? So Satan needed God's permission to test Job, and God set limits on what Satan could do, right? So in Job 1:12, the Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is under your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. Don't touch him," right? Don't take his life. So this account shows that even when evil spirits act, God ultimately controls the outcome for his purpose, right? Yeah, and the Job thing, that's a tough one. That could be its own video. So we're not going to go too deep into that. God's character in these actions, we have to remember that God is just, and evil spirits are allowed as an instrument of judgment or testing, but their actions can never contradict God's holiness or justice. You have to remember that God is sovereign and he uses all things for his purpose, including the actions of evil spirits, because he is in control. God's ultimate plan is redemption. So even when evil spirits are permitted to act, God's ultimate goal is to bring justice, refine his people, and fulfill his redemptive plan. I think I spoke about this in another video, how it really sucks when something happens to us that was out of our control, right? And then we could get demonized, we can be tormented, some evil spirit can come in, or we have to, deal with the repercussion of someone else's actions. But at the end of the day, God can still redeem us from that, no matter what it is, no matter what somebody else decided to do to us, no matter what kind of trauma we have, no matter what kind of thing that we went through. God can still redeem it at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter what these evil spirits do. It doesn't matter what kind of evil spirits somebody else has that did something to us. God can still redeem it, right? He redeemed his people from Pharaoh. Job got, redeemed as well. Lots of people in the Bible that lost things or had to go through some bad stuff, they also got redeemed. So these are things to think about. We serve a God of justice, judgment, testing. God fulfills his divine purpose, and these actions are not arbitrary but are consistent with his justice and sovereignty. While these instances may seem kind of difficult to reconcile, and it may be like, oh gosh, why would he do this? They do serve as a reminder of the consequences of rebellion, the reality of spiritual warfare, and God's ultimate control over all things. He has a purpose for all these things. So keep this in mind. It's not because he's mean. It's not because he's evil. There's always a reason why. And, sometimes we don't always know the reason, and we don't always have to know the reason. Just like a parent and a child, we don't explain everything that we do that we tell our kids to do. Sometimes we say, hey, listen, just do it, and that's it, right? But at the end of the day, I don't really feel like God does that very often in most instances. He has conversations with his people. Moses, they share their concerns with him. He tries to accommodate them. He tries to build them up. He tries to give them courage. Gideon, all of that, they're like, oh God, no, not me. I'm not the one. And God's like, no, you can. And I'm going to show you how. I'm going to show you why. I'm going to give you the strength. I'm going to give you these signs. I'm going to help you out, and he's very patient with us. So I hope this explains this for you, and you feel like you understand this a little bit better about why God would send an evil spirit and why we still serve a good God, even though he allows these things from time to time.